Hello, hello. Good morning, good day, and good afternoon to you wherever you might be in the world. Thank you so much for joining us here at DevNation for yet another wonderful tech talk that we're going to be doing here in the next hour. Thanks for being with us. I've got a wonderful guest, Taylor Smith, who's going to be talking and demoing the project InstructLab, which is a open source way that we've kind of developed here at Red Hat, but also in partnership with IBM Research and open source to the greater community to tackle the challenge of large language models and actually applying them to applications, to services, and being able to take something that has been traditionally very generic, very general purpose, and actually specializing it for a specific use case. And you'll kind of start to see that what this does is it allows, folks who don't have data science experience or ML experience or that technical expertise to actually make a contribution to a large language model and actually have an impact on AI. So that's what we're going to be getting into today. But let's back up here just a second. Very interested in where you're coming from today, where you're from. So let us know in the chat here. Myself here, I'm in Las Vegas, Nevada, but I'm from North Carolina, and just happen to have a wonderful guest with me here today, who's also in North Carolina, I believe. Taylor Smith, feel free to introduce yourself.
Hey, yeah, I'm in Boston today, but I am from North Carolina. So I'm coming from our Boston office in here. And I've been with Red Hat for about 3.5 years, and I just joined our AI BU a few months ago. So I'm super excited to talk about this topic and help more people learn about InstructLab today.
Very, very glad to hear. Thank you, Taylor, for joining us today. Are you out in you said the Boston office?
Yeah.
Nice, nice. I heard it's a little colder than what we have in the South right now in the East Coast.
Yeah, except it's like oddly warm, so I overdressed. But that's okay. I'll just be sweating a little today.
No, not a bad problem to have, I guess.
Yeah.
I see some folks in the chat. Hey, Ravi, coming from India. Welcome to the stream. Chris, coming from St. Louis, Missouri. Nice town over there. Well, so how we're going to set this up today, super casual, is that we're going to kind of introduce what this project is, why it's important to you and me and developers and even non-technical folk who are invested or interested in AI. And then we'll go ahead and see it in action. I'm really excited to see how this project works, how we can kind of use this and get started with it. Because I think what's really unique is traditionally, taking an AI model and fine tuning it, not only is the expertise very high, but the computational resources needed to do that is also high. And I think what we're going to see is that this kind of enables accessibility for folks who might not have, those type of hardware resources to make those contributions and actually impact those models. So I'm super, super excited for today's session. And Taylor, I'll let you take it away. If there's any questions that you're wanting to ask, feel free to do so in the chat about AI models, the InstructLab project itself, and we'll kind of go through the session and go back and forth and answer those questions, but also dive deep into this exciting topic. So without further ado.
Thanks, Cedric. Okay, good. I was just about to ask if I'm sharing still. Great. So I'm going to talk about InstructLab today, but before I dive into InstructLab, I am going to give a little bit of a generative AI primer, if you will, so we're all on the same page about some of these terms that get thrown around a lot to help set up the demo that we do, and I'll give you more detailed information about InstructLab as well. So I always have a cat picture in all of my presentations, okay? I am signature cat lady of the team. So I created this using DALL-E. The prompt was like, give me 2 cats, developing, super serious, working on AI, right? So this is what they gave me. I'm really happy with the output. I don't know why they always do hoodies, but I'm into it. It's cool. So there is so much hype around AI right now. As we all know, we are just being inundated daily. We hear about new models. We hear about bigger models. We hear about new companies. We hear all kinds of weird stuff and cool stuff every day, right? I'm trying to take that information and take all of this news and information that we're being pummeled with every day and turn it into something that we can actually use in a practical way to help our day-to-day lives, both individually and personally, but also in professional settings. That's kind of the challenge we're all figuring out right now, right? Like, we know it's cool, like we've probably used ChatGPT, we've tinkered around with some of these tools, but how to actually apply it practically to our daily work or daily personal tasks is not always super clear. So that's kind of the journey that we're all in together right now. Like, we know that this is important and very impactful technology, but we don't maybe know exactly how to implement it. So these are just a few statistics that I like to show that really quantify the magnitude that we're talking about when we say AI is this big deal, right? What does that actually mean? So 85% of enterprises are going to have used AI APIs or deployed AI-enabled applications by 2026. And the AI platform software market overall is expected to grow to $87.5 billion by 2027. So we're absolutely on a growth trend, right? So it's the time to like jump on the train. It's the time to learn what these tools do. So you are a smart person around these topics, right? It's an important time to jump on and figure out how to start using these tools, especially as, you know, if we're thinking in the customer setting, like as Red Hat, we want to jump onto the train now because we want to make sure as customers are trying to figure out how they're going to use this tech, we are at the forefront, and we are at the forefront of everyone's minds with our products, but also with InstructLab, which is what we lead largely with IBM. So just some terms to clarify things. So when we talk about AI, we're largely talking about two categories. We're talking about predictive AI and generative AI. Predictive AI has been around for decades. We are using this every single day. Some basic examples are like text auto-completion. So if you've ever used Google search, which we all have, or any search engine, I type in what's the best, and then it auto-completes and gives you all of these suggestions, right? That's predictive AI. That has given me predictions based on historical data that it has around what millions of other people have searched in the Google search engine, right? Online shopping recommendations, music suggestions in Spotify. These are all examples of predictive analytics. Generative AI, this is what we're focusing on when we talk about InstructLab, and this is what is in the hype cycle. This is what news is talking about every day, right? These large language models, ChatGPT. This is all generative AI. So if you've used ChatGPT, obviously this is like the prime example. This is generative AI. It's generating net new text data based on historical data that it's learned from. The image generation tools like DALL-E that I used for that picture, like Stable Diffusion is another very popular one. These are examples of generative AI where it's generating that net new data. In the case of images, net new pixel data. Amazon review summaries. So this is kind of, well, I feel like it's new, but maybe I just didn't notice it until recently. But for the Amazon review summaries, if you look at all of the Amazon reviews at the top, it'll give you this text summary of all of the reviews. So you don't have to like parse through and figure out the gist of like, is this shampoo that I want to buy good, basically. So that text summarization function is a function of generative AI and large language models. And then large language models, of course, that is another big word that gets thrown around a lot. This is also like the prime example of generative AI. And large language models are what power the chatbot interfaces that we use, like ChatGPT or like Google Gemini or Claude or any of those if you've played around with those. So getting a little deeper into large language models, because again, we hear about it, but like, what are they? Large language models are like computer programs, essentially. So large language models, they're a component of generative AI that are focused on training machines to learn, to understand, and to generate text as a human can. So the way that they're able to do that is by being trained on an incredibly large amount of data, just immense amount of data sources, billions and billions of parameters of data. It learns and trains on this data, text data, and then from that, they are able to do so many versatile tasks that most of us have probably seen, like text summarization, answering questions, generating whole blog posts, books, summarizing text, so many things, right? It's very extremely versatile technology. The more data that they're trained on, the more they evolve, the more they know, the more they're capable of. So that's why we keep hearing, oh my gosh, there's trillions of billions of parameters of data used for these. We keep, seeing bigger and bigger models getting released. So yeah, go
I'm
ahead.
wondering as well.
Yeah,
So you talk about a large amount of information being distilled into this model, right?
yeah,
This I'm wondering how does that effectively, I mean, like how much data, and how does this process work? I guess we're just taking a chunk of the internet and
yeah.
doing some type of training, I guess, to get to a certain point. And so it's kind of like a freeze of data and then
Yeah.
compressed.
Yeah, so the data gathering and the data curation and that all, I mean, that's all a very intensive process that data scientists need to be responsible for. It takes a lot of time and resources to do so. But yeah, and in most cases, we don't know what all the data sources are, right? Common crawl is one that's a big example that is used a lot, where it's essentially the entire internet is being
Wow.
used as a source of data, which introduces some problems, like not all of there's a lot of crap on the internet, right? There's a lot of stuff that that is like not great or completely false or biased. So there's challenges with using data sources like that. But yeah, it's an immense amount of text data like that, and I'm not a data scientist, so but that essentially gets turned into, it gets tokenized, and then that is what is used in the what's called pre-training process of the model. And then and then that's kind of the model content at that point.
I see. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's super interesting.
Yeah, it is really interesting. So speaking to that, like the challenges of gathering that data and the amount of time and resources it takes. So these are the large language model challenges that I want to highlight, but outdated knowledge is a big one, because so all of these large language models, they have some knowledge cutoff. So in the case of the free version of ChatGPT, that one I think is the knowledge cutoff is 2022, if I'm remembering that correctly, which, a couple years old. But that's because it does take so long to gather the data, curate the data, and then the training process itself takes quite a bit of time as well. So it's not something that is ever able to be constantly done and consistently done. So there's periods of time where we get new model versions, but they're always going to be a little bit behind. Another drawback that I want to highlight is the lack of domain expertise. So the LLMs are trained on all this broad knowledge, right? Like they're very generally great at the whole internet. So many, like all the encyclopedias, it knows so many things, right? But when you start to drill into specific domain areas and ask it very like pointed questions in like a specific niche area of healthcare, as an example, you'll start to notice that it's going to not perform as accurately as you would expect. They are not meant to be specialized models. They are meant to be general knowledge models. So if you're trying to use GPT-4, specifically for your very like niche healthcare domain, it's probably going to try to pull from other areas and give you kind of irrelevant information or wrong information when you're trying to get it to be specific. So that's a big concern that a lot of companies will have, as well as the fact that you cannot, add your own information, proprietary, company data, private data into the model directly either. So that's another limitation when companies are trying to use these in production. And so both of these concerns, the outdated knowledge, the lack of domain expertise, directly correlates into what's called hallucinations or false information that I have on the bottom left.
Mm-hmm.
Because so if it's old knowledge, right, if I'm trying to ask it about something that happened in the last year, or, even if I'm trying to kind of test it and be like, tell me about Taylor's amazing cat company, right? It's not going to come back and say, I don't know. It's going to give me something. It's going to try to predict based on like everything that it's learned and all the relationships between the data points that it's been trained on. It's going to try to tell me what Taylor's cat company is, even if Taylor's cat company doesn't exist. It's going to spit out completely false information, right? That's what's called a hallucination, which can be disturbing slightly, because if I'm actually trying to use it for a legitimate purpose, I'm trying to genuinely kind of use it as a search engine, which is not recommended, and I don't know better, I might be reading that and think it's completely true, and not know the difference if I'm not fact checking in the background too. So that's like a big thing to be aware of. Like if you're trying to use it for extremely factual information, you need to be double checking it consistently, because it could be giving you very confident, incorrect answers.
Mm.
Yeah, so another concern is the lack of data transparency, which is a big part of what we'll talk about with InstructLab. So these large language models are pre-trained on so much data, and in most cases, we have little to no clear information about the data sources that they're being trained from. So we might, there are open models out there, and we might have and understand the content of the models themselves, but the sources from which the data is coming from that is being used to train it is oftentimes not open source, which leads to additional concerns like ethical concerns, bias concerns, like is this data coming from a diverse kind of set of regions or something, to make sure that we're not just pulling from, like one country in Europe, just as like a silly example, right? We want to make sure that we want to make sure that we're not having completely biased data. But if we don't know where the data is coming from, we can't really check that unless we're in complete control of everything. And then, of course, the cost and efficiency. So these models are extremely gigantic, right? So running them, trying to train them, just inferencing alone, it costs an immense amount of money and consumes so many resources, not just the resources of the GPUs in the data center, but the resources of cooling the data center and like powering that data center. So it has a lot of, climate and energy implications there as well that a lot of people are concerned about currently. So large language models themselves have their own concerns that I just went over, but I'll touch briefly on the challenges that companies face overall when they're looking to adopt generative AI. Model selection, like which model is safe to use? How do I maintain data security, data sovereignty with the model that I do choose? What type of model should I use? There are so many like specialized models now. Which one should I use? It's a very challenging decision that companies and individuals have to make, and it can kind of be a blocker to know which ones they should be using or which ones they're allowed to use. Lack of expertise, sourcing data scientist expertise, or being a data scientist, if I'm actually trying to like do this all myself, right? It's challenging, it's expensive, it takes a lot of time and brain cells to learn these skills. It's not realistic for everybody. It's not realistic for every company to hire those types of people, certainly not at the scale that we'd like. The data sourcing and the data collecting, maintaining data. This is like the critical part of all of this work, and it's extremely challenging, and it takes an immense amount of understanding and knowledge and care. Very critical to generative AI, and just not easy to do, because again, like that is typically in the data scientist area. Explainability and transparency. So generative AI and technology like large language models, it can often seem like a black box because we simply do not understand it, because we are not data scientists. If you're relying on this technology for critical business applications and business outcomes, or as a developer, if I'm relying on this for the company that I work for to use it, and you don't know how it's working, you can't explain how, like what the output, why the output is the way that it is, that's a problem, right? So we believe, okay, it's our belief statement. Red Hat and IBM believe that the future of AI is open source. We see huge potential and benefits with smaller, more specialized large language models. So they're still, in most cases, large language models, but they're smaller, talking like 3 to 7 billion versus hundreds of billions of parameters. They're more cost efficient and effective to run, and they can be fine-tuned more easily and built to purpose for business use cases. So there's two. So before I talk about InstructLab, I want to talk about Granite, because that Granite is like the central piece of, well, part of the, it's a big piece of the InstructLab project, because when you work with InstructLab, you're working specifically, if you're contributing actively, with a Granite model. So the Granite models are open source under Apache 2.0. They are optimized for business use cases. They are smaller. We just released new versions of them 2 days ago. So I have a lot to learn about the new versions as well. There's even more specialized models and different types of models. Mostly, like I said, they're on the smaller side, so they're more efficient and cost-effective to run there. So they're really primed for business use cases, but also like laptop local running use cases, because it's challenging unless you have my fancy laptop that I was given to me by my company, it's challenging to run these 70 billion or above large language models. It's not realistic. So these smaller models are really optimized for that. And not only are the models themselves open source, but the data sources are also open. So InstructLab. So this is an open source project for enhancing large language models for generative AI. So I will talk more about that now, and that's our nice little puppy logo. They really need to make us they need to make us little dogs.
Plush toys.
Yeah, plushies. Thank you. Yeah,
we
they
need
really
some
do.
for Podman, and we need some for InstructLab. But
Podman's a seal, right?
yeah, Podman's a
Yeah.
seal.
Yeah,
But
that's good.
I think it's on my backlog.
Yeah, I need that for my kid. So InstructLab is based on the LAB method. So the LAB stands for large scale alignment for chatbots. So this method is used for fine-tuning specifically large language models to enhance them to better serve your individual use cases or a business's requirements. So as I talked about before, one of the large concerns about LLMs is that they are not domain specific, right? They're just very general, and they're meant to be general, unless you're getting a specifically specialized model. They're also not trained or able to be trained on proprietary data, like I also said. So as a result, right now, companies, individuals, they want to find ways to figure out how to use this large language model technology while also being able to leverage and draw from their own proprietary data, so that in the end, they're getting that specialized domain-specific experience that they want without touching the model directly in some cases. So RAG, or retrieval augmented generation, this is a very popular way this is done right now, or at least it's talked about very frequently. Prompt engineering is, of course, another one. There are also more traditional fine-tuning and training techniques. None of these techniques on this slide are mutually exclusive by any means, and many times we'll discuss them as being used together to really have an optimal experience. Fine-tuning, retrieval augmented generation, and prompt engineering, they all have specific purposes, and you should be using them for specific types of data, specific use cases that you're looking for in that end result model. For the lab method specifically, we're talking about fine-tuning and even more specifically instruction tuning, which in very basic terms, it means teaching the large language model how to take and respond to your questions with the given context that it has extremely well, in very basic terms.
So I guess if I'm building out an application and let's say I want the model to respond in like JSON with a particular format and how it does that, right? Or I don't know, knows some certain terminology about my organization, right? All of these things that I could do in the context, I guess, of a prompt window. But then if I start a new chat, if I do a new query, all that's erased, right? Kind of how containers are ephemeral, right? I feel like the sessions that we have and the conversations with LLMs also are, because every time you start up a new chat, all that history is erased. And so I guess these methods are all about improving the model, but also maybe for labs specifically, baking what we just did there into the model itself, right?
Right, exactly. And figuring out like what you need it to have every single time you use it, and what makes sense for that use case. Like the example you gave with like the JSON output, like that would be a good example of, and we're trying to figure things out like that right now, but to fine tune on like that specific skill is what we would call it for InstructLab. If you're doing that, if that's like a consistent thing you're doing in your work, like that's a consistent output you want for your end result model, that absolutely makes sense to fine tune with, versus if it's like a one-off or some different type of use case, it might be more appropriate to just have for prompt engineering, like within the context window or whatever. And figuring out like when to do what is also really challenging, but Red Hat's hoping to be very like at the forefront of like providing that guidance really well too, along with IBM.
Right, I love that.
So a little more about lab before I go into the demo. So within InstructLab, you use a starter model. So you can use with InstructLab Upstream, so of course we have like our product, but InstructLab Upstream, you're specifically working on a Granite model. If you're trying to contribute upstream, you can also absolutely download whatever model locally to work with and play around with. But the InstructLab project works best with the specific Granite-based model that we use, which is specifically kind of like a dumber model. Like it's specifically not fine-tuned for anything. It's like not heavily pre-trained, which makes it more malleable and easier to fine-tune. So, okay, so just kind of to give example of kind of the workflow. So let's say I need my model to know about a new company, like I gave the example earlier, Taylor's Cat Company. Okay, so the data for fine-tuning my model is organized in a taxonomy file structure. Okay. The main buckets within this taxonomy and the two types of data I can add are what we classify as knowledge or skills data. Knowledge is to teach the model about something. A skill would be teaching the model how to do something. So that formatting example is a good example of a skill. Teaching the model just general content about my new company would be knowledge. So my company data, it's a piece of knowledge. So I'll place my knowledge file, which is a YAML file that we'll look at when we do the demo, into this taxonomy file structure. From there, we have a synthetic data generation process that takes our relatively small manual amount of input and then generates, with the help of what's called a teacher model, which is another large language model, it generates this larger data set, which we need because the model, even though it's a smaller large language model, it's still a large language model. We need a significant amount of data to be able to impact the behavior of the model and to actually help it learn something. So if we just had like the one file, that's not enough. So the synthetic data generation process creates this larger amount of, you'll see it's question and answer data, which is for the instruction tuning. So once we have that larger data set, we then use this to go through the fine-tuning process, which happens along the workflow. One of the major benefits that I do want to emphasize is just how simple it is to add new data into the large language model. You'll see, obviously, it's on the terminal, so it's not, it's not like the most accessible to like front desk staff or like people who are not on the terminal all day. But when you compare to the data science skills that I don't even understand what they know or what they need to know, when you compare to that, adding a YAML file into a file structure is enormously accessible, right?
And I think what's so cool, that you're also about to talk about is that, while you might be interacting with the CLI, is that this is all from an open source perspective. And so the same way that we've been creating, issues and doing commits in our open source projects and then doing those pull requests, like sorry that you're about to talk about. Let's say that
No, that's good.
we have a repository, and I don't know if you've ever used the GitHub web editor, but sometimes when I'm having a really, really weird Git issue, so sometimes I'll just hop in there and throw the file in there. I
Yeah.
think that might have happened hopefully to every one of us, but it's also like you have that usability perspective because we're applying the open source idea to this world of AI, and the fact that you go from Git repository for that data curation and then go from there, I think is what's super accessible and the awesome part about this project, right?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I'm just having flashbacks to Git problems I had recently because I'm like trying to learn Git like really well, and oh boy, but when all else fails, new Git clone. So this every time this visual just shows the process of you're creating these knowledge files and skill files. So there's kind of different representations of this, which I'll might struggle through explaining. So, but like we have our product, which has the company specific taxonomy repository, right? We have the community repository. So this repository being like what you are opening up PRs to add a knowledge file to or a skill file to. There's the community project, which again is tied directly to a very specific Granite base model. But you could also have a separate repository that you're working with locally or you're working with it locally. Like if you don't want to contribute to the Granite model, you don't want to work with the community, but you want to like figure this out on your own with your own repo, you could also do that. And it would be a similar process with your repository and your files and the pull requests and all of that. I struggle to like explain that super well because there's so many like iterations of how you could do this. But that's kind of, hopefully that kind of makes sense. And that's kind of the gist of it. But you have all these skills and knowledge files that you're trying to contribute to a target model. You open up PRs to have them approved and accepted into the repository. Once that repository version, how you want it, is set, that would be the point where you would start the pipeline for synthetic data generation and then subsequently fine tuning. Hopefully that makes sense. Does that make
No,
sense?
I think that's a great analogy, and maybe you can kind of think about it in terms of when we're about to like do a release with an open source project, right? We freeze the code, we do some QA, right? And then we start building all of the binaries and all of the releases for different versions and different system architectures of that application. And so it's kind of that, I feel like that same process here where we're going in, we understand everything that's been added to the model, right? Because this is done in an open source way, right? We have that transparency with the data we're adding. And then we start that pipeline to then release a version kind of at a certain point of that model's information and capabilities that we've added. And we can kind of go forward and backwards and do different versioning because we have that structure. And I think that's super awesome, right? AI is such a new field, and we haven't really had this kind of a structure really, out there before.
Yeah, and we'll have more guidance too about kind of how to manage that audit trail. That was something we were working on over the last few days too. So we'll have more. That's exactly how we have to track the model outputs. Like if you get a model output that like isn't acting the way you want, or maybe there's something wrong with it, you can directly connect it to a specific tagged or like git tag or specific git commit of your repository, and that's kind of how you manage those versions. And we'll have more documentation about that moving forward, which will be
That's
helpful.
super cool. That's really, I think that is, especially for enterprises, that's really, really important.
Yeah, it is, which is why we need docs on it. I'm working on it. Okay. So I said before, so InstructLab is an open source project, but I do want to highlight a little bit, like there's that open source workflow and experience of the process. And then there's the experience within our product as well. And I kind of just explained it, so I won't really go into it too much more, but we have, the community instance. We have like you doing stuff on your own, right? We have the community instance, community project. So when you are committing to the actual InstructLab project and it kicks off SDG and fine tuning, that is with a backend that is supported by IBM and Red Hat in terms of like server infrastructure. So you have your like local stuff with whatever servers you have. You have the community with the like IBM Red Hat server backend to be able to do the training in SDG. And then it's the same situation really in the customer environment where they own the infrastructure, they are managing their own taxonomy, everything is private and contained within their appliance. And their backend is the RHEL AI server that they have to support the training and synthetic data generation. So that leads me into the demo, which, everybody needs to pray for me because see how this goes.
Did you sacrifice your copy of Windows Vista this morning?
Yeah, I should have. I did. I forgot that. So, okay. So I got to switch shares, which I will figure this out. Let's see. Yeah. Oh, how do I retract share? How do I like stop sharing this?
I think,
oh,
I
did
think
he do
you
it for
did
me?
it.
Okay, good. Thanks. So wait, I stopped. Click that button. And then I'm gonna see. This is already going so well.
Oh
I'm
no,
really excited for me.
Don't worry. I'll look around here for a copy of Windows Vista. Okay. XP, but that wouldn't do the job.
Okay, so I'm gonna make this bigly. All right. So awesome. Don't judge my tabby setup.
What SSH viewer is this?
This is Tabby.
Tabby, nice.
And hold on, let me try something. Okay.
Nice.
Oh, it was just like lagging. I think it's lagging. Hold on. I'm typing and it's not showing up. That's what's happening right now.
US East 1 is a little slow today.
So I'm gonna get in there. Give me a sec to get the SSH commands back.
Yeah.
And then I'll get back in there.
And even while you're doing that, let me quickly talk about for if you want to get started and do what we're doing here today, how you can do this on your own side. So let me share my screen here.
Sure.
As well. So if you head over to, let's see if you can see this here in a second. If you head over to InstructLab.ai, and we'll put this here in the chat so that you can access it as well. If John, if you could share my screen, if that's all right, really quickly. I'll just kind of share briefly about the project and kind of show that you can try out the CLI here on GitHub. Those models that Taylor was just talking about that are built from those community contributions, I think that's a really unique way that everyone from the community can actually build a model, and I think one of the first few ways. So you can check that out on Hugging Face. There's a paper that actually outlines how all of this works. And that's why we say large-scale alignment for chatbots, and we shorten it for lab and InstructLab. But it kind of details how this all works, this model agnostic process, how it actually improves the model with these different prompt templates. And it's very interesting. And there's documentation that we'll go to and kind of more information on how the process works. But Taylor, should I throw it back to you?
Sure, yeah. I managed to SSH again, and all is well.
Yay. Awesome. Cool.
Crisis averted.
Yay.
Is that big enough? Is that good?
Yeah, that's great.
Okay. All right, great. So I am in a demo environment that we have that has one NVIDIA A10 GPU in it. And I have pre-downloaded some stuff. InstructLab's already installed. And I'm just going to show some of the basic components of the product and basic commands to get kind of a sense of how things work and how easy things are. So I'm going to, so when you're working with InstructLab and obviously any sort of Python kind of setup, so we have a virtual environment that I'm going to work within. So I'm going to activate that. And I'm going to verify that it's installed. Okay, so this tells me that it's installed, shows me some of the basic commands. And then I'm going to do a version check to show you the version, which is 19.3. Right now, the most up-to-date is 19.4 as of like several days ago. So I have 19.3 installed here today. So I'm going to configure it now. So I'm going to do iLab config init to kind of get some of the defaults configured. I have this on a separate screen, so I'm going to move this over here so I can see what I'm doing. So it just asks for some basic defaults. I'm going to just press enter. You could configure these differently, but I'm not going to. So I'm going to say, yes, that's my taxonomy repo path. Sure, that's the path where I want the model to go. So what's cool about the 19 versions is that, so before, in the 18 version, 18.4 specifically, you would have to select explicitly which GPU profile that you're using in your setup. With 19 now, it actually detects it for you. So it doesn't, there's not a specific so these are just GPU profiles. There's not a specific profile for A10. So L4 is like the closest. It's detecting that. So I'm going to say, yeah, that's cool. That works. So everything's initialized at this point. So I'm going to show you that I have pre-downloaded the models here. So I have, and if you go to the InstructLab community, you'll see, I believe at least this one, it directs you to download. So these are the models I downloaded today, and is often what we demo because they're quantized models, which means they are essentially compressed model files, which are easier to run locally. Likely, if you're doing this, that's another point. So not only are you running smaller models, but you're likely going to need to run quantized models if you're running and working with models locally. So that's what we have here. So I'm going to serve one of them, which just means I'm going to deploy one, and then we're going to chat with it a little bit just to kind of see the chatbot function that iLab does. So I'm going to do iLab model serve. model path, and then I'm gonna, have all of these memorized, of course. Let's see.
That's impressive.
Well, I'm saying that. Yeah, okay. I'm just second guessing myself now. Okay, I'm gonna serve the
What would we
granite
do if there was
model.
no tab key?
You know what I mean? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and now now that this is starting to serve here, I actually should have prepped another terminal window. So we need to open up another, well, do I have tmux in here?
So I kind of like this analogy that you're serving
Yeah.
this model, right? So you've
Yes.
got a service. So let's say I have like a Apache or something, right? Running a web server and it's serving, say, my HTML pages, right? And then I would go in on my browser, right? And I would go to localhost or wherever we're port forwarding or something like that, and then access that website, or I guess in this case, access that model, right?
Yes. So yeah. So now I've opened up the second thing, and now we're able to chat with it, which
And you
is
mind making
going
it
to.
a little larger when you have
Oh
a.
yeah. Yep. Is
I think
that
what also have conversations about a lot is people who, well, so one of our colleagues, Hugo, is a big API guy, and he tries to teach people in his sessions that, hey, when you're using ChatGPT or Gemini or any of these popular large language models, you're actually just making API requests behind that UI, right? The UI is actually just making, say, like a post request to a model that's running, and all you're
Yeah.
doing with the UI is just typing back and forth, and then that goes and it's traditional APIs to do this. And so I think that's
Yeah.
super cool. You think of the chatbot front end that's actually talking to the service behind it, which I guess in this case is that model that you're serving, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So I just asked it, what is Red Hat, just to kind of show, of course, this is like a visual bug, but it's giving me information about Red Hat. You can interact with it just like you do ChatGPT. Of course, it's not being powered by the GPT model, so it's not going to be what GPT is giving you, but it's like whatever model that you want to, download locally, whatever open source model you can, and you can use the InstructLab server which is using Llama CPP to serve the quantized model, and then you can chat with it. So you can set up a little local chatbot for yourself, which is safe, and your company will allow you to do it.
That's big. That's really
That's
big right
big.
now
That's
for
big.
on-premise healthcare type of situations, HIPAA, etc. Right? Can't
Right.
send that data anywhere.
Exactly. So I just typed /help just to show like these are the different things you can do within the chat. You can start a new session and all kind of the basic things. So now I'm going to show adding a Q&A file and show you what that looks like. And I believe this is the setup that has them already cloned. So that's good because I'm prepared. So I am going to first, let's see, look at that if I remember where it is. Good for me. Okay. InstructLab knowledge, Q&A. I'm going to first look at this. So this is that YAML file I was talking about. Let's see if I can make that. Okay. So I'm just going to scroll up. And there's all kinds of directions on how to create these and the exact formatting you're supposed to use. And of course, it's YAML, so it's a little bit prickly. But essentially, it's a relatively short file. You have 5 of these, what we call context chunks, which are sourced directly copy-paste from a GitHub-hosted Markdown file. So you have these 5 context chunks. And then along with each context chunk, you have 3 question and answer pairs that are directly related to and asking questions about the context chunk. So you'll see I'll have 5 repetitions of kind of that setup. And this is the file that you add, and exactly how to do that and like what type of data to do that for is what we'll continue to put guidance into the community repository. But for this one, I've created a Markdown file and this Q&A.yaml file specifically in the effort to teach the model about InstructLab. So that's the file. Yeah.
This is really cool. And a question I actually have is, is so I see the cool question answer format of types of queries and responses that we want the model to have that we're
Yeah.
architecting with this YAML, which is really cool. But
Yeah.
I'm wondering the context part. So I see it's kind of like how you would get quizzed on like an exam or something, right? With the question and answers that you want to have in different subjects, right? And that's the
Mhm.
taxonomy. The single source of truth part. Let's say I'm pulling from like Confluence and documentation PDFs from our organization to have here. Is that in the context part itself up there where the questions are being asked, or is this in the document that we're referencing there at the bottom? How does that work?
So it's kind of both. So the markdown file, and it's not something that should be enormously long. If it gets too long, that means there's probably multiple topics happening and you should probably have multiple markdown files and multiple associated Q&A files. But the markdown file is longer than what these context chunks are, longer than these context chunks that you include in the YAML file. So the markdown page, which no, it's too complicated to switch shares. But the markdown page is, a certain link that has other data in it as well. The point of this really is the question and answers. You should be like pulling the context chunks like from kind of, you need to like kind of think through exactly where you're pulling it from your markdown. Like you don't want it to be all from the first half of it or something like that. Because the point is these question and answers that you're creating. These are examples, like instruction examples that are used directly by the synthetic data generation process as examples that it uses to then base its own synthetic data generation off of. So if you don't have good, like comprehensive questions, if you're not doing it on like, let's say like you only chose context chunks from like the first third of your document and you completely didn't touch the rest of it, that means your synthetic data generation process and your end data set that you use for fine tuning is going to be missing a lot of information that you wanted it to have. So you have to be methodical a little bit about like how you create this, and then also what is in your markdown file. But the markdown is like the grounding information. And then really the main basis of this is the question and answer examples that you're writing. I don't know if I actually answered your question, but
No, that's awesome. Yeah, I appreciate it.
okay. Okay, so now I'm going to, the taxonomy file structure, right? There's kind of two main buckets within that. There's the knowledge bucket and the skills bucket. So I will go into, yes, okay. See, I'm just remembering all kinds of stuff that I didn't think I would. So I'm going to go in here. So you'll see the foundational skills directory, the knowledge directory, and the compositional skills directory. These are like the main kind of parent directories that matter the most. And then underneath there, if I just go into knowledge as an example, you'll see these topic folders underneath there. So for the InstructLab knowledge that I'm trying to teach the model, I'm going to create my own folder in here within which I'll place the Q&A file. But essentially, I just wanted you to see that base taxonomy file structure, and then everything's just organized by topic underneath that. So I'm just going to create my InstructLab directory. I'll do an overview directory underneath InstructLab. So now that I have that, then I can copy my Q&A file in there. This is so riveting, I know. Let's see.
I'm on the edge of my seat.
I know. Me too. Okay. So now it's in there. So in order to verify, like I added that in the right place, like I didn't mess anything up, I'm going to do iLab taxonomy diff, which will show me the Q&A files that I've added in there. So if I added like 10, it'll show me 10 different Q&A files that I've added. That way I kind of do a little bit of an inventory of, okay, this added properly. Oh no, I put it in, I had a typo and I made the wrong directory, anything like that. So that I checked it, it's valid, that's great. So at this point then I can do iLab data generate. Okay. So, and there are many, so there's it's kind of two main, well, yeah, two, I was questioning myself. There's two core kind of processes that you kick off with commands. The iLab data generate kicks off the synthetic data generation process, and the iLab model train kicks off the fine-tuning training process, which I know that we're kind of conflating terms there, but it's like it's a fine-tuning process. So iLab data generate, there are various parameters you can add that the default is just me running this, right? But there's other parameters you can add as well to kind of tweak it.
Oh,
You
wow.
can, yeah. So this is helpful to read through, but like there's like a simple pipeline for data generation. There's a full pipeline. Of course, we recommend the full pipeline, but if you're just trying to play around with the tool and kind of get a hang of it, maybe you just want to run something that's like the shortest thing, right? Like you're not trying to get an amazing model output, but you just want to play with the tool or whatever. So I might choose to do, pipeline simple. Another one that I'll call out is the SDG scale factor. So you can tweak this, which impacts the number of instructions that the synthetic data generation outputs and creates. So again, the default is 30. If I don't want to wait that long and I'm just kind of playing around, I might tweak that down to 10 or something like that. So I'll do that where I will do, let's see, what do I want to do? I'll do pipeline simple, and I'll do SGG scale factor 10. Yeah, it's going to do it. Great. It's doing it. Yay, it worked. So now it's doing it. And the amount of time it takes to do any of this is completely dependent on the amount of synthetic data or the amount of human input data that you're adding, like amount of Q&A files that you've added, and then your CPU or GPU setup. So it's going to be completely dependent on that for how long this kind of thing takes. But then the end, you get these data file outputs. And I'm questioning real time how long to ask.
I'm looking at the logs here, I think right after you ran that command. So
Yeah.
it says connecting to model server at localhost. So that's the model we're serving from before that we downloaded, right?
So as part of good question. So as part of the data generate, it serves the teacher model, which if I go back over here and right. Okay. So I forgot that this was still serving. So I left this up. So it'll error out because you can't like do both at the same time, which I think this will, yeah, okay. So I can try that again, but I'll show you first the config file again so you can see, well, I didn't show you this, so that's good we're looking at this. So I'll show you the config file. This shows you all the default settings. So I'm going to go up to, oh, that's hard to read in this. That's better. So like for the train portion of the pipeline, it'll show the default values there. A lot more lines than they did in the previous versions, but they have I'm looking for the generate. There we go. So let's see. So these are all the generate defaults. The default teacher for upstream InstructLab is this Merlinite model. So when I went to run data generate, it went to go serve this, which I already downloaded. So if I didn't have this downloaded, it would have errored. You can also see that default SDG scale factor that I brought up before. So, and I know we're kind of close to time, so I want to be cognizant of that as well. But because we probably can't wait for that to run. So once the SDG runs, which I'll just show really quickly, the output data goes into local share InstructLab data sets. It'll go in here. So this, maybe it like started to do stuff. So, but this isn't. So it would go and create a knowledge train messages JSON line file within which you would be able to see all of the synthetic data output. So we don't have time to do that today, but that would be the target area that would be the target directory it goes into. Once you have those files ready and you've completed the full SDG pipeline, then you can go to like I would read it, right? Like I would read through it, and like make sure it looks okay, like have some human eyes on it, because we can't, don't completely 100% trust AI. But a cool part about that process is that the teacher model, the Merlinite model upstream, also acts as a critic model. So it will also, try to fix if it creates something just completely wrong, or like not natural language data output or something like that. It does clean it up to an extent, but it's still good to have human eyes on it anyway. So once you have that data set and you've looked at it, at that point you would run iLab model train, and you can look at the config file or the -- help to see there's various parameters you can use for that too. But the default, or the recommended default, is this multi-phase strategy, and you would point to these files and then kick off train. And then that takes various amount of time depending on what kind of run you're doing, what kind of setup you have, et cetera. But it's, thinking about like what I don't even know data scientists have to do, the fact that I added a YAML file, I did data generate with just a few commands and like understanding the parameters to set and all of that. And then running iLab model train, which we've done before too, plenty of times. It's extremely accessible, right? Like I'm not a data scientist and I feel like a genius. So
Right. That's awesome.
yeah, but that's kind of it. So yeah.
Nice. So I think zooming out a little bit, as a developer, or there's this whole new term of like AI engineer that's out there. And it's like there was a time when there was no DevOps engineer, right? And so I think we're still trying to figure out in organizations who's the one that's responsible for curating a model specific to their application or to their organization in general. I think what's interesting is now that this is all abstracted, right? So the actual effort that we have to do, manual like effort taken by one of us, is pretty minimal, right? It's just focusing on the actual data itself that we're curating. That, as you said before, you've got to be meticulous about how you put it together, right? But as far as generating and labeling more data and the training part, I think that's what's so unique, is that now this is what used to be really tough, is now abstracted to where you could even do it on a personal computer and do a proof of concept, kind of how you were doing it right there. I think that's awesome, right?
Yeah, absolutely. We're like really excited to see what types of people try this, like what they run into, like if you get involved in the community or just doing it locally, like not contributing necessarily, but like open up issues, like reach out to us. Like this is so new, right? Like that research paper that Cedric showed came out in February, right? And now we've productized it, and it's October. Like that is everything is very fast moving. That is a very short amount of time to have this like full-fledged project out there. So we are really interested because it hasn't been implemented in many places really, right? So we're interested in feedback. We're interested in how this is getting used by whom, because it is so fast moving and growing so rapidly.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you say, I think February. I think, yeah, that's so fast to go from research all the way to having a project and an implementation of that actual approach.
Yeah.
Because with research, things don't always move as fast, right?
Right.
But if you've found this session interesting and there's any questions that you'd like to ask Taylor as an expert, feel free to do so. Whether it's generative AI or LLMs. And I think if you're interested in and reaching out, then absolutely feel free to join the InstructLab Slack. I'm actually sharing my screen here, John, if you have a second, to put this back up and kind of point you in some cool directions. So if you go to this first link, this is the GitHub organization, github.com/InstructLab, where you can essentially install the CLI, but also connect with the community and ask any questions that you have as you're dealing with these specialized models and contributing to them. And it's a great community that's kind of already started, and I think it's been fantastic, Taylor, having you on for the session today. I know we're pretty much at the top of the hour, but I found it to be really insightful, especially if I'm kind of new to the world of AI, to kind of break it down, to make it much more simpler, to even show chatting with a model on your own machine, which is really cool to be able to stand that up. And yeah, anything you'd like to share with the audience here as we kind of close up?
And just thank you for listening. And like I said, like all the feedback, any feedback, connect with us on LinkedIn. Like we're working with this directly every single day and very happy to like know who's testing it. Definitely participate in the Slack. We're very active on there. Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Cedric.
Of course. Well, there you have it, folks. It's been another fun here Tech Talk at DevNation, the community. Thank you so much for participating, for being here. And we will see you again soon. So feel free to stay posted in the newsletter and see for the next tech talks that we're starting to kind of bring back up and in action. We're covering all types of things in cloud native and Quarkus, of course, for the Java developers out there, but also containers and Kubernetes and much, much more. So on behalf of myself and Taylor, I want to say have a great rest of your day. Thanks so much for watching.
Thank you.